Hello, and welcome to Exchanging Eternal Truths. I'm your host, author, and minister Heather Lancaster, and I'm happy to be joined by my favorite person in the world, my spouse, Minister Greg Lancaster. And today we're going to be talking about
the walking in the integrity that God has called us to be as men and women of God, and what that looks like practically, and what are biblical examples of that we can learn from. Very excited to be here, and thank you for spending your time learning and discussing with us more about God and that relationship. There's no better investment you can make in your life than getting closer to God and to increase your relationship with Him.
So when you're talking about integrity, a lot of people say they have integrity, but what does integrity really mean to you?
For me, the first thing that comes to mind is honesty. Are you honest? Can people trust your word? We live in a culture now where that is not as valued as it used to be, where in the past, great business deals were done by the power of a handshake between two people, and that's all they needed. They didn't need the lawyers and to read the fine print in triplicate to figure things out. They could just trust that person was a man or a woman of integrity, and they trusted that they had a deal. And now that is the current culture that we live in, that is not as important, but it is as important to us as Christians to not do as the world does, but do as God has called us to do.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of in Bible times, a lot of times the covenant was done, like you said, just by word, but also they'd exchange shoes. That was one of the ways I know and I believe it was in the book of Ruth, when they would go to town, they'd go to whoever was in charge of the town, and they'd exchange shoes as a method of, and only one shoe. So it's not like you had a new pair of shoes to walk away from. It was just a single pair of shoes, or a single shoe. And so that was the exchange of a shoe, was to say, I've done this deed with you.
Yeah. So if someone had a sneaker and the other one was wearing high heels, then they would become unbalanced in their walk.
Is that where that comes to unequally yoked?
I think so. Yeah, unequally yoked in your own gait and your own way of traversing the world. So hopefully they were of comparable shoes that they could exchange there. But yeah, that's a great point about that's because it conveys a level of trust to say, I trust you enough to give you something of mine and to receive something equal of yours, and that to seal the deal.
And we think about it, we talk about that exchange of shoes. To us, that might not be as big a deal. You make the joke about the sneaker and the high heel. But back then, they probably only had one pair of shoes.
Right.
Or at most, probably two. Maybe one to work in and then one to wear to synagogue or something like that. So
yeah, they didn't have a shoe closet like so many people have.
That's true.
Yeah. No sneakerheads in the Old Testament times.
Yeah. Well, there's growth in the world.
Yes.
That's why we're under a new covenant.
Right.
Somewhere in there, maybe there's something about shoes.
Yeah. So if you're out there and you have a shoe addiction, then now this is something we can pray for you about, so you can be delivered of that shoe addiction. And I've met as many men addicted to shoes as I have women, to be honest with you. That the sneaker culture, and I use the phrase sneaker heads, which is a common vernacular now. But people can get obsessed with just about anything and obsess about anything, and getting the best sneakers and the most exclusive things can be problematic. So, joking aside, hopefully there's not those people out there, but if you are, you can be delivered of it.
Well, I think you actually sort of dive into a different topic that maybe we want to talk about another day, but no, you laugh, but anything can become an idol, whether it's possessions, whether it's, we think about, when we talk about not worshiping idols in the scripture, it talks about, we think of, you can't make any graven image, But anything that gets put before God is an idol. So there are people who put possessions, cars, shoes, houses, relationships. Yeah, that's a really good thing. That's kind of a whole topic in and of itself.
I agree. So food for thought.
Food for thought. Maybe next time.
Yes. But I'm reminded of the verse when we're talking about integrity and having that level of integrity. Matthew 5:37 in the New King James says, "But let your yes be yes and your no be no, for whatever is more than these is from the evil one." And this is Jesus speaking here, and he's talking more about don't swear on things. You don't have the right to swear this or that because you're not in charge of that. He hasn't given you that authority to do that. He's saying, but be firm. And as a matter of fact, the Amplified Version said, let your answer be a firm one, a firm yes or a firm no. And for integrity's sake, just keeping your word is a big deal. It's something that, again, we see people getting lax on. And if people are looking at you to be something different, to be a disciple of Christ, they want to see that level of commitment. And if you're constantly breaking your word and you're not reliable to them, then you are no different from the world. You don't have anything that a lost person would want in a Christian, or that is not the best example of a Christian to someone who's lost or someone who needs to come back to Christ.
Well, and I'm reminded too, I even referenced this in one of the books, that it's even as something as simple as making a promise like, yes, I'll absolutely meet you for dinner on Friday. And then you find every excuse in the world to get out of it. And it that seems like a little thing, but those things build up. And if somebody then feels that you can't be relied on in any circumstance, then your integrity, your character is essentially shot, because they can't believe any. If you can't be faithful in the little things, how can you be trusted with the big things?
Yeah, I've said that for years. If you'll compromise on the little things, it's just a matter of time before you'll compromise on the big things.
And how many times do we see that whole notion where, it's just a little white lie or something like that? That's, as believers, that's very dangerous territory to get in, wouldn't you say?
Yes, very much so. I'm reminded of a pastor that I knew many years ago in Nashville, and he, Pastor David Spring, and he said that after church, people would come up to him and they would just begin to say, "Oh yeah, we should get coffee sometime," and it became code for, "I have no interest in getting together with you at all, but I'm going to say that I am." Just to be nice and to be pleasant. And that's, a danger that we have a lot of times in church speak. And if it's a lie, it's a lie. If you have no intention of doing that, of actually getting, in this case, in this scenario, of getting together, then you're better off not saying anything. If you know you're not going to do it, or you have no intention or desire to do it, then you're better off not saying that.
And is that, in that particular instance, is that one of those things where they just wanted to look better in his eyes? Is that?
Yeah, I think that was a big part of it. He was a pastor over a certain part of the church, and they thought it would be great to trying to buddy up to them. And I appreciate him, even years later, calling it for what it was. He's like, okay, when I hear you say that, I know that you have no intention of doing that, because there's no mention of a date or a time. It's just this nebulous idea that, oh yeah, we'll get together sometime. Let's have coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah. It became a running joke in the church.
And I mean, I've had people do that to me. Oh, we need to get together. Let's do lunch. I'd like to pick your brain on this topic or that topic. Can we meet over lunch? And I go, yeah, sure. Here's my contact info. Crickets.
Yeah. And sometimes that happens, and it's just a one-time thing. And everybody has, we're the busiest culture that's ever existed on the face of the earth, and we all have things going on. But if it's a repeated thing where, oh yeah, let's get together, and it never happens, then it just begins to look like an integrity thing, or a lack of integrity, or insincerity at its very core.
Yeah, which, I once had a friend that if you were going to get together, you had to tell them 30 minutes earlier than you really wanted them to get there, simply because they couldn't be counted on to arrive on time.
Yeah.
And even something as simple as that. And we all have things come up. You could all get stuck in traffic or something else. That it's not saying that you have to be perfect all the time.
Right.
But it goes to a quality of character that if the people around you go that you can't be counted on, that you don't think, and this becomes how it's perceived, at least from this end. And I'm one of those people, I always try to be early for anything. If I'm even 5 minutes late, I am trying to call the person saying, sorry, I'm running late. But yeah, when it becomes a consistent pattern, the person on the other end of that goes, do you think so poorly of me or have so little value for my time that, my time doesn't matter
Right.
anymore? And that's where we get, and again, you referenced us being very busy, but that's where we get into trouble as a busy society. What's more important, your word or your busyness?
Yeah, absolutely. Your word, and we have to reflect something different than the world is giving. And if we're making false promises or being loose about our appointments and the things that we're saying that we are going to do, then again, we're no different from the world. How will they see something different if they don't see it in us?
And the scripture tells us, we're to be salt and light, which means being different. It means showing ourselves and holding ourselves to a higher standard.
Right.
So let me ask you this. When it comes to integrity, and especially when it comes to men, obviously that's not something I can speak to, but what does that mean as a man? How is that taken? And what would you say to encourage other men who may be struggling in that area?
Yeah, if they're, I would say you're better off saying less or nothing than you are being verbose of speech or have an abundance of speech to make false promises that you have no intention of doing. And obviously we go into the golden rule here: do unto others as you want done to us, or as what you want done to you. If somebody is making you a false promise, how does that make you feel? And we've probably all been there. I know I have. I know I've had relationships and good friendships, and I eventually came to the point of realization that I was the only one really holding that thing together, holding that friendship or that relationship together. I was the only one reaching out, or I was the only one making plans to get together. You eventually come to that. But every time that I would posit the idea, hey, let's get together, and those plans would fall through, it became a pattern that they didn't have an interest in doing that or didn't have the time to do that. And that's okay. But they would have been better off saying, I don't have the time right now. I'd love to get together, or it just doesn't work for me right now. But I think for self-reflection, as a man, I try not to say anything. I don't like disappointing people in general, and so I'm reluctant to make a definitive plan. And a lot of you know part of my testimony. And obviously a lot of you don't, but I deal with an illness that keeps me from that can flare up at any time and would keep me from being able to have the energy or mental wherewithal to get together or do an event. And so I have to be cautious when I'm making promises because there's a level of uncertainty in my future. So I always try to make and keep those appointments. And for some reason I have a flare or something comes up, I try to communicate that to the other person as quickly as I can. And that's why I'm very careful to do that, because I have extenuating circumstance on in those areas. So I don't want to make a promise and then let people down by not being able to attend.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of it goes into, and you were touching on it, I think a lot of it goes into the idea of the relationship, that when you're in a relationship with somebody, and I'm not just talking about somebody with the opposite sex, but business partners, friendships, that becomes a two-way street. Like you said, you had to come to that realization when somebody would bail out on you. And I, I've lived in different cities across my lifetime, and the people that wanted to make it work, wanted to make continuing friendship work, they would carve out the time, and you'd be very intentional with it.
Yep.
And that's one thing like that I've noticed. And it falls along that path of integrity. It might seem like we're getting off, but I think we're right on the path of it. Integrity goes into every area of your life. It's not just your casual comments with folks, but it gets down into the nitty-gritty of those relationships. Can people trust you? Do people want to be involved? But also, that's a two-way street. You have the people who, like you said, you were the ones trying to make all the arrangements. You were the ones trying to make it happen. And then you have other people who go, no, we're going to have this conversation on this and such a day. And I know I can speak like to my best friend. We lived in all these different cities apart from one another, but we've always set a time to say, this is when we're going to catch up. This is when we're going to have this time. And we're flexible because life happens. But yeah, I mean, to have that moment to say, her time is valuable, my time is valuable, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. And to your point, Heather, about seems like we're getting off topic, we're always going to be led of the Spirit, and whatever Holy Spirit wants us to talk about is the direction we're going to be going. So if it seems like it goes off topic, it could be us, but we also want our first goal is to be sensitive to what He may be saying and may be leading us. And to that point, he was, I think, sharing with me how many blown appointments does it take for you to ruin your witness with another Christian or with someone who's not, who see, you had a chance to represent Christ and represent Christians, and you kept flaking on your appointments and not doing what you said you were going to do. How many of those does it take for you to blow your witness?
Well, and that's a good principle regardless. Think about that from a business perspective.
Sure. Right.
If on my marketing business, if I had client meetings and I never showed for them, I'm never going to have those clients.
Right.
Or if I make a promise that I'm going to deliver a material, or I'm going to deliver a certain piece of content by X and such a date, how many times can I miss that before they go, I don't want to work with you anymore?
Right.
So that's something that goes, again, integrity and relationships really go hand in hand because they're reflecting you, but you're supposed to be reflecting God.
Right.
I'm reminded of the scripture in Colossians, and I believe it's Colossians 4. Yeah, it's Colossians 4, and let me pull it up. It said, Colossians 4, starting at verse 5, walk in wisdom towards those who are outside. And when it talks about outside, it's talking about those who are not of the household of faith, as they say. So people who aren't believers. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. Yeah. And, when I think about that, and I love how it reads in the Passion Translation, which is walk in the wisdom of God as you live before unbelievers and make it your duty to make Him known. Let every word you speak be drenched with grace and tempered with truth and clarity, which goes to the integrity point. It says, for then you will be prepared to give a respectful answer to anyone who asks about your faith. And if they can't trust you, they're not going to ask you about your faith. Your faith doesn't matter if they can't take anything that you're saying as truth.
Yeah, I love that. I love that verse and that principle. And Colossians 4:5, reading it out of the Amplified, says, "Conduct yourself with wisdom in your interactions with outsiders, non-believers. Make the most of each opportunity, treating it as something precious."
Oh, wow, yeah.
So I think that adds a lot of context there. It's because their time should be precious to you. Their word, their commitment should be precious to you, and that reflection of your life as a Christian should reflect that to them.
And that's in every area of your life. I mean, it can even be somebody you talk to at the grocery store. We used to have this cashier that we would always seek out her line because we just enjoyed talking to her, and we would kid and carry on with her, and she would laugh, and there'd be something about that. But people will be drawn to you if you show them something different.
Yeah, and the good news is if it seems like this is heavy or anything like that, this is what we're supposed to be doing anyway. And two, the good news is that because the world is in the state that it is, you will stand out if you're someone who simply keeps your word. I mean, again, we shouldn't get bonus points for keeping our word. That should be something we're doing anyway. But because the world has changed to the degree and people valuing that, and just like Heather was talking about with a business isn't going to tolerate you going and missing meetings and missing deadlines. No, they're going to find someone else who does. And now imagine that business is the lost, someone who is unsaved, who has been hurt in church. They see that you can't keep your word and you're no different from anybody else, and they're going to find somebody else. They're going to find some other example to follow instead of you, instead of Christ. So it's a heavy responsibility, but again, in this day and age, you can really shine and stand out by doing those things of integrity, those things we're called to do anyway.
And isn't ultimately reaching the lost our number one job? We can talk about business. We can talk. I was thinking, in the concept, if you're an employee, how many times are you going to be 15 minutes late before they fire you?
Right. Yeah.
We heard another minister talk about that their work day started at 9 and they had a secretary that came in and spent the first 15 minutes in the bathroom putting on her makeup.
Yeah. Made it a habit.
Made it a habit, and that habit got her fired.
Yeah.
But, it's the same thing. But ultimately, that our witness is our number one job.
Absolutely.
That's the number one ultimate. That was the Great Commission.
Yeah, and we're using business as an example because it's something we can all relate to. But as Christians, we have a higher calling. If we're Christian businessmen or Christian businesswomen, then we are held to a higher standard, not a lesser one. You don't get greasy grace, as they say. I sat under a teaching pastor for many years, and he would need a project done at the house, and he would flip through the Yellow Pages, if anybody out there still remembers Yellow Pages, a phone directory where he could find contractors to do work. And he said as soon as I'd see that fish printed on their advertisement, he said I'd just keep on flipping, because he had had too many bad experiences with Christians holding themselves to a lesser standard by saying, oh, well, I'm a Christian too, brother, so, there's forgiveness. That's not what grace is for. That's not what grace is about. And it's insulting that Christ did what he did, and we can say, oh, we can skirt the rules. I don't know why this is coming up, but do you remember when you were in grade school and you're in the gym class and they would have you run around the gymnasium? Then
I would really try to forget that.
Yeah, those were dark times. But for me, when I was in elementary school, we had a gymnasium, and it was a rectangular gymnasium like most of them are, and they would tell you to run the four corners, run around, and you'd always have one or two that would try to cut the edges, cut the corners, literally cut the corners. to do less, and instead of going to each point and then taking the next turn, they would try to do that. And if they got away with it, you'd see the curve get larger and larger and larger. And so they were running far less than the other people, which obviously isn't, or other kids, which is obviously not fair. And what happened when the coach would see that, he would oftentimes he would punish that student for not doing it correctly, and sometimes he'd punish the whole class because they did it. Those weren't fun days. So when you get punished for something that someone else does because somebody else literally cut corners, and you get punished for it. So,
and we talk about this especially in Christian lives and how important it is to do what we say we're going to do, to follow instructions to the letter in a job situation, in a school situation, that sort of thing. But we understand too that nobody is perfect. So if this is an area that you're struggling with, if this is an area that you've had challenges in the past, then I want to encourage you that there is the ability to change. There is the ability. We would love to pray with you. If you leave a comment, we'd love to come in agreement with your prayers on being better. We'd love to encourage you in that area, that as we grow in the Lord and as we embrace these concepts of integrity and honesty, that we are growing. We are all works in progress. The Bible says we are running a race, and it should be our goal to finish the race well.
Yes.
We want to be able, when we stand before Jesus, for him to say, "Well done, good and faithful servant."
Absolutely.
So I want to just encourage you with that. That it's an encouragement that we can all be better.
Yeah. I want to reinforce that too, that it's not about being perfect. It's not about being this legalistic idea that, I've got to get everything right. I can't make a mistake, or if I miss an appointment, mad, angry God's going to reach down and get me. Definitely not the case there. It's just a moment of self-reflection. Are there areas in our lives where we have gotten into those patterns, where we have been lax in keeping our appointments or our time, or being respectful of other people's time? Have we said unnecessary things? Have we made promises that we had no intention of doing? Those moments of self-reflection and asking God, "Hey, is this an issue for me? How can I, if it is, how can I improve that? Or I want to be better." And that's something that we will love to pray with people about.
Yeah, and I would say too, just like you were saying, take that moment and just ask the Lord if there's something in your life that is an area for improvement. Ask him to reveal it to you, and he's faithful to do that. So, on that note, any closing thoughts?
No, I know it's got a little heavy there, and with that topic, all topics won't be that heavy or that, I guess, intense, but it's one of those things that it is important, especially in today's culture, and we can make a huge witness for Christ if we do those things that we're called to do.
Thank you. And so I want to, again, encourage you all. If you have any questions, any comments, we would love to hear from you. You can comment on the thread, depending on where you're listening to this podcast. And as always, I want to thank you for listening to eXchanging Eternal Truths, brought to you on Spotify or wherever you're listening to your podcast. We thank you for joining us, and we will talk to you next time. Be blessed.